There was a luxury car in the 1930s so beautiful it now sits in an art museum in New York. It also had a small problem. On a steep, icy hill, some of them climbed better in reverse. That was the Cord, the first working front-wheel drive car America ever built, made by a man who owned an empire of around 150 companies. Both the car and the empire were gone inside a decade. And the reason why is not the one everybody assumes. Here is the part that makes it stranger. That museum car was not even his boldest machine. A few years earlier, the same man had sold a car with no grille on the front at all, headlights that vanished down into the fenders, and power going to the front wheels at a time when the rest of Detroit swore that could not be done in a real automobile. His name was Errett Cord. The company that built it was the least of what he owned. He owned Duesenberg, the finest car in America. He owned an engine works, an aircraft plant, a piece of the taxi trade, and a stake in an airline. Around 150 companies. And he let the whole thing go in a single summer. One of those companies is still flying today. The car with his name on it lasted barely 2 years. That gap is the whole story. To understand how a man ends up there, you have to go back to what he was before any of it. A salesman. A very, very good one. In the early 1920s, Cord was hired to help a struggling little car maker in Indiana called Auburn, a company with a few hundred cars sitting unsold on the lot and no clue how to move them. What he did was almost insultingly simple. He had the cars repainted in brighter colors, added a little chrome, and sold the whole backlog. Then he did it again with new models. Within a few years, the man who had walked in to shift some stale inventory was running the place. And Errett Cord was not a man who stopped at running one company. He took the money Auburn threw off and he started buying. Now, one of these purchases would outlast every other thing he ever touched, and we will get to which one. He bought Lycoming, an engine maker, so his cars would never wait on anyone else's motor. He bought Duesenberg, the car so good its name became a word for anything excellent. He took a slice of the taxi trade through Checker and moved into the sky through Stinson Aircraft. By the middle of the 1930s, the Cord Corporation sat on top of roughly 150 separate businesses, and the man at the center of all of it was still in his 30s. So hold that picture. When Cord decided he wanted a car with his own name on the hood, he was not a dreamer in a garage. He was one of the most powerful industrialists in the country, with the engines, the aircraft, and the finest mark in America already under his roof. He had every advantage a man could have. Remember that. Because even he could not make this work. The first car to wear the name landed in 1929, and it did something no successful American car had done before it. It drove the front wheels. You take that for granted now, sitting in whatever sedan is in your driveway. In 1929, it was almost witchcraft. Every other car in America sent its power to the back. Cord sent it to the front, and he had a reason that had nothing to do with showing off. He leaned on an engineer named Carl Van Ranst, and on the front drive know-how from the Indianapolis race cars built by Harry Miller. Those racers had proven you could pull a car through a corner instead of shoving it, but the prize Cord was chasing was not speed, it was the shape. Send power to the back and you need a drive shaft running down the spine of the car and an axle humped up under the rear seat. Drive the front wheels and all of that disappears. The whole body drops. Lower than anything else on the road. The L29 came out long and lean and hugging the ground while every other car at the country club stood up on its wheels like it was wearing stilts. It won design prizes in Europe. People who saw one in person tended to go quiet. Under that endless hood sat a Lycoming straight 8, around 299 cubic inches, making somewhere near 125 horsepower. Cord's own engine in Cord's own car. The whole empire feeding one machine. But the beauty hit a problem, and it would be dishonest to skip it. Pulling all that weight through the front tires meant the L29 struggled on a steep, wet grade. That is where the old stories come from. Owners swearing they had to back up an icy hill because the thing climbed better in reverse. The kind of story that follows a car around for 90 years. And yet, the front wheels were not what doomed it. The calendar was. The car went on sale in the summer of 1929. A few weeks later, the stock market fell off a cliff and the Great Depression arrived. Cord had built a beautiful, expensive luxury car and aimed it squarely at the exact buyers who had just watched their fortunes vanish. It is hard to picture worse timing in the history of the automobile. The L29 limped along and shut down around 1932, with only about 4,400 ever built. For most men, that would have been the world sending a clear message. Cord took it as an unfinished sentence, because a few years later he came back to the front drive idea, and this time he built the car people would still be arguing about 90 years on. It started, of all things, as a smaller Duesenberg. A young designer named Gordon Buerig had been working on a compact, cheaper Duesenberg that the company shelved when money got tight, and the sketch sat in a drawer. When Cord needed a new car in a hurry, that drawer is where he reached. The story goes that the Coffin nose Cord began life as a baby Duesenberg. Make of that what you will, but the bones of it hold up. What Buerig drew was unlike anything on an American road, and it started at the front. There was no upright radiator grille, no tall chrome tombstone standing up front like every other car wore like a necktie. Instead, the whole nose was wrapped in flat horizontal louvers that curved right around it, like the slats of a window blind. People took one look and called it the Coffin nose, which tells you something about the era's sense of humor. The name stuck. Then there were the headlights, or rather, the missing headlights. On every other car they sat out in the open, two big round eyes bolted to the fenders. Buerig hid his. They folded down, flush into the top of each front fender, and when you wanted light, you reached for a little crank inside the car and wound them up into place by hand. The idea came straight out of aircraft landing lights from the Stinson planes elsewhere in Cord's own empire. This was the first American production car to hide its headlights. Detroit would take decades to catch up. That is the kind of detail that makes you stop and look twice. The car was the 810 and later the 812, and it arrived for the 1936 model year. Front-wheel drive again, of course. Cord was not about to give up the thing that made his cars his. Power came from a Lycoming V8, around 289 cubic inches, making roughly 125 horsepower in standard form. And the body was built in a way almost no American maker was using yet. No heavy separate frame with a body bolted on top. Instead, the body and the structure were effectively one piece. Lighter, stiffer, modern in a way that would not become normal for decades. Then there was the one part that was pure ambition, and it caused the most trouble of all. The transmission. The driver picked the next gear with a tiny lever on the steering column, then finished the shift with the clutch, an electric and vacuum setup that hung out ahead of the engine, past the front axle, because that is where front drive put it. On paper, it was the future, a near automatic in 1936. In real life, the early cars had a habit of jumping out of gear, and the shift could be clumsy and slow. Some of the first owners learned the car's tricks the hard way. And those first owners had another reason to be nervous, because of how the car reached them in the first place. Cord showed the 810 at the New York Auto Show in November of 1935, and the reaction was everything he could have wanted. The crowd stacked up so deep that people climbed onto the bumpers of nearby cars just to see over the heads in front of them. There was only one small issue. The cars on the stand were not actually finished. Some of them did not even have working transmissions underneath. To earn that spot on the show floor, Cord had promised to build 100 cars by the end of the year, and the factory threw everything it had at that number. So, some of the very first Cords went out the door before the engineering was sorted. Vapor lock, overheating, the gearbox gremlins. A car this advanced was always going to have teething trouble, and the rush guaranteed the public watched it happen in real time. If you are enjoying this one, do me a quick favor and subscribe. This channel is one story at a time about the cars and the men that Detroit would rather you forgot, and there is a new one every week. That is the whole ask. Still, when it ran right, it ran like nothing else. And then Cord went one step further and built the version people remember. The Supercharged 812. He bolted a supercharger onto that Lycoming V8 and ran the exhaust out through 4 bending chrome pipes that burst from each side of the hood and swept back into the body. Those pipes are one of the most copied touches in all of automotive design, and they started here. The supercharged car made something like 170 horsepower, and some sources push it higher, closer to 190. Either way, it would run past 100 miles an hour, which in the 1930s put it in rare company. One of them went out and set stock car speed records, riding on front drive bones that traced all the way back to those Miller machines on the bricks at Indianapolis. So picture where Errett Cord stood in 1936. His name was on the most advanced, most beautiful car in the country. He owned the engine company that powered it, the aircraft company that inspired its headlights, the great luxury name in Duesenberg, and a piece of the airline business on top of it all. The empire was complete, and it had less than a year to live. The end did not come from the assembly line. It came from the accountants and the government. Cord had built his empire the way the loose 1920s allowed, through tangled stock deals and holding companies stacked on holding companies. But the rules had tightened. Federal regulators at the new Securities and Exchange Commission started circling him over how his stock had been handled, and Cord, reading the wind, had already put an ocean between himself and the trouble by spending long stretches in England. Then, in the summer of 1937, he made his move. He sold. He let go of his controlling share in the entire Cord Corporation and walked away from all of it. The buyers had no interest in building cars. The automobile side was the glamorous part of the empire, but it was never the part that made money. Duesenberg lost money on nearly every car it built. Cord had just proven that even a masterpiece could burn through cash, so when he let go, the car companies were switched off. Cord, Auburn, Duesenberg, three of the most storied names in American motoring, and all three went dark together, in 1937, inside a matter of months. The 812, the car that had drawn crowds standing on bumpers 18 months earlier, was finished. In total, only around 2,900 of the 810s and 812s were ever built. The man himself was fine, by the way. Cord moved west, made new fortunes in real estate and broadcasting, and lived comfortably for decades. It was only the cars that did not survive. Now, remember that one purchase I said would outlast everything else he touched? Here it is. The airline that grew out of his aviation holdings kept flying, kept growing, and became one of the largest carriers in the world. The engine work, the aircraft plants, the pieces of Cord's machine got absorbed into other companies and carried on under other names. So the strangest thing in the whole story is what survived and what did not. The airlines lived, the taxis lived. The one thing that carried his actual name, the beautiful car he clearly cared about most, was the thing he let go first. And here is the part almost nobody expects. Getting shut down was the best thing that ever happened to that car. Because a car that stops being built in 1937 never gets the chance to grow old and ordinary. It freezes in time, exactly as radical as the day it launched. And as the years passed, people began to see that Gordon Burig had not simply drawn a pretty car. He had drawn one of the most important shapes in the history of American design. The Museum of Modern Art in New York would one day hold the Cord up as one of the finest examples of automotive design ever made. Not a good car for its era. A piece of design worth hanging on a museum wall. The body itself refused to stay buried. After the collapse, the tooling for that coffin nose shape was sold off, and other companies built their own cars on top of it, reworked with ordinary headlights and ordinary rear-wheel drive. The shape was simply too good to throw away, even with the company that made it already gone. And decades later, in the 1960s, an Oklahoma enthusiast named Glenn Prey got hold of what was left of the Cord name and tooling and built a run of smaller replicas because people would not let the design rest. Today, in Auburn, Indiana, in the actual Art Deco building that once served as Cord's own headquarters, there is a museum, the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Museum. You can stand in the same showroom where these cars were first revealed and look at survivors of all three Marques, the ones the Empire built and the Empire could not save. The values finish the story on their own. A good original coffin nose Cord is a six-figure car now. The best of them, the Supercharged 812s and the rare open-bodied cars, have climbed toward $500,000 at auction. The exact record keeps moving, so treat any specific figure as something to check fresh, but the direction only ever runs one way. A car that helped bankrupt its maker in 1937 is now worth more than the house most of its owners lived in. Which brings us back to that hill, and the L-29 backing its way up the ice, and the man who owned 150 companies and still could not keep the one with his own name on it alive. Errett Cord had every advantage a man could have. The money, the engines, the aircraft, the finest mark in the country. He built two of the most advanced cars America had ever seen. And both of them were ahead of their time, which is usually a compliment. For the Cord, it was closer to a curse. If you want the rest of these, the beautiful machines that took their companies down with them, subscribe and stick around. There is a new one every week.